Hello, this is the MPower podcast where we stand up, speak out, and support. My name's Cassidy, and I'm the intern here at Motlow State Community College, and I operate through the MPower Project, which is a grant provided by the Office Against Violence Against Women, offered through the Department of Justice. And we're here to spread awareness and resources to people in the community about gender-based violence issues, as well as how to be an upstander in our community. We'll be discussing topics on how to be a safe community. And each month we'll have a different guest on to speak with us about how they work to promote a safe and healthy environment for the Motlow community. Today we have with us Dr. Pam Harris. Dr. Harris is the Academic Dean of Humanities and Social Science. She's openly shared her experience with gender-based violence in the past and is a passionate advocate for this field. She's also a part of our community coordinated response team working in the prevention portion of the OVW MPower grant, and is always eager to lend her voice to speak on issues such as this. So thank you for joining us today. How about you go ahead and tell us about yourself?
Thank you for having me. I am a psychologist. First and primary, I would say that's where my heart will always be, with mental health, women being empowered, gender issues that we have in our society. I've been teaching a long time prior to taking this job. I taught from 2005 until I took this job about 15 months ago. I am very passionate about what we do. I also teach social problems, sociology, many of the things that deal with this. You're right, I do share my story, just simply for the fact that I think that people who are in any type of an abusive relationship really struggle with sharing that. There's a real difficulty and a real stigmatism, and I think that people are embarrassed or shameful when they feel like, oh wow, I hear it, well, I would never be in that kind of a relationship. And I would say that gender-based violence stretches across all types of situations, all economic backgrounds. And so I think it's just really important that we focus on the idea that people who are willing to share their stories do so that we can make a difference in society.
Would you be willing to share some of your story with us today?
Yes. I was involved in a relationship for about 5 years. It was emotionally and physically abusive when I was in my 20s. That was a very difficult time for me in life. It is hard to share. It's still, even now, I'm almost 60. And I still, as you asked me that, I kind of had that heightened where I went, but it is one of those things, I think, for me and for most people who become involved in any type of an abusive relationship, it doesn't start out that way. It really starts with the idea that a person meets someone, that person really particularly has a skill or hones into what they think that you want. And so they become that person to you. So quickly, they're a very charming kind of person. They feed into how you feel and pick up on the things that are important to you. And to begin with, I would say for everyone, they are a Prince Charming or a Princess Charming. Certainly wasn't my case. I thought, oh, wow, I've met the man of my dreams. This is great, how wonderful this is. But it quickly turned into a problem with the fact that person became very controlling. They began that. He separated me from my friends first, then separated me from my family. And then with that, he would do things like measuring the miles on my car, turning over furniture in our home, destroying things, just horrible things that he said. So it was really, there was also violence in that, which I'm going to kind of move past that because that's kind of one of those personal things for me. But it was very traumatic. And I think you get to the place, and I think most people who are involved in a relationship like this get to the place where they have tricked you into believing that it's your fault or that you can fix it or whatever that might be. So it's very difficult. And then truthfully, there's just a great deal of shame and embarrassment that comes along with that. I always thought of myself as a pretty intelligent woman, pretty strong and independent. And so to really be caught in that situation was very difficult. It typically takes women about 5 to 6 times to leave. I left in 3. So I still go, wow, I left and would go back, and because they're very convincing. And in my case, I quit school. I did all of these things to make that person happy. It was a very traumatic time in my life, but I share with others that happened to me, and that I had the ability to leave that because I had a support system. And I want to talk a little about that later. Is having a support system is essential to someone being able to leave. A family that cares about you, a family that helps you get out of that situation, a group of people, a support, especially in extremely violent situations. You need someone to be there to help you. And when we have another question, I have some information. I really want to talk about that. But for me personally, this is probably one of the most important things I share, just simply for the fact I think there are a lot of young women out there that are in the same position, or have been, or are headed that way. Men too. I don't want to take away from that either. And so I think this is essential that we talk about this.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us. As your role as dean and on the CCRT, why do you think it's important for us to do this for our students, faculty, and staff?
I think because we owe that to one another, right? I mean, we're colleagues, we're educators, and so much beyond that. We are people. We have a responsibility to others to share that. As the dean, I think it's essential for me to speak about what has occurred in my life. I also think that it's just essential for us to do this as a college. As a teacher, especially teaching psychology, sociology, social problems, marriage and family, I don't ever remember, honestly, when I was in a classroom going without a semester of talking to a young woman. In the state of Tennessee, 1 out of every 2 violence calls is domestic violence. So that means the people that we are with on a daily basis are the most harmful to us. And so young people come to college, adults come to college, and it's our responsibility to help them, to educate them, to be there and be supportive. So I think this is essential to our well-being for one another, to the people that need us here. More than anything else, we're supposed to care for one another. I deeply believe that. It's the reason I do this job. And so I just think that's essential to who we are, is to reach out to people who come here, who are trusting us with their futures.
You had mentioned prior every 1 in 2 violence calls is a domestic call. Data also shows that the age range most vulnerable for gender-based violence is age 18 to 24. And so when we talk about speaking up, what would that look like for you in this community?
For me, speaking up, doing things like this, right? Doing a podcast, doing, whatever we can to let people know that we're working on this, that we are part of this grant, talking to people. I would say speaking up too, in my opinion, sometimes can be even different than this. Yes, we need to do this in formats where the public can hear us and the public can see us. But speaking up sometimes, in my opinion, is that we speak to one another. Let's say that we know someone in a situation. And like I said earlier, when I was in a classroom, it was not infrequently someone would ask me about this. I passed out a sheet of red flags one day, and I saw them all over the hallway after class, because I feel like, people really relate to the idea that this happens. So speaking up is like that student doing that. She immediately took this red flag and put them at the water fountains. And I thought, wow, yeah, where people go, right? So speaking up, but speaking up to me too sometimes can be the idea of, hey, people, as I said earlier, feel isolated. So speaking up might be something like saying, you know what, I'm here. I see you. Not judging a person who is in a relationship that is not beneficial for them. Speaking up is, I talked about earlier too, that it takes 5 to 6 times to leave. And usually by the time someone leaves, people are frustrated with them. So speaking up can be, I have a friend who is in a relationship now that I don't agree with. But so speaking up can be being honest with your friend, saying I will be supportive. Speaking up can be also the flip side of that. After you've spoken to that friend, if they choose to stay in it, not abandoning them. So speaking up becomes the idea that we speak to them, that we speak to others, that we help people understand. I also really want to say, when I was writing down speaking up about that, when I want to tell people to be very careful with the advice that they give. So speaking up, sometimes we want to give advice because we think we know a lot. And I would say what I always tell everyone, yes, you want to say, I'm here, I'm supportive, I care about you. But in violent relationships, you need to be really careful about how much you speak up. I think we often want to say, yeah, you just need to leave immediately, but that's not the case. When women say they're afraid to leave, it's really the truth. Somewhere between, 50 and 65% of the time when a woman leaves a very violent person, it can end in death. So when I say speaking up, it is more of a speaking up of support, letting people know that kind of information so that when someone is in a very violent relationship, I think we want to tell them, leave. Now, how would you stay? And the truth of the matter is you need to say, here's the support number. Here's the hotline number. Here's what to do in this circumstance. Talk to someone, get a support system, find a local shelter. Those are important things to speak up to people about, encouraging people. And for me, I go back to the red flags. Speak to people before they get into violent relationships. I would say the vast majority of people see things. We're so enamored when we meet someone that we think is charming and great that we, love is blind. Truly, we know, that's a chemical reaction to someone who's very charming to us. And so I would say speaking up becomes the idea when your friends or your family says, look, there's an issue or there's a problem, listening to them. So when we are advising people, when we are speaking up, letting people know, listen, I see this. This person has a drinking problem. This person has a temper. This person is jealous. This person, and I know, that most of us know there are many things, but there are many red flags. And I would say we really have to pay attention. I've talked about this when I've done some other podcasts and interviews. People have patterns. Yeah, it's really interesting to me. You would think that people who grew up in abusive relationships or alcoholic homes or families of chaos would absolutely go, I'm never going to be in that kind of relationship. But that's just not the case. Statistically, we are shown over and over and over again that people who are raised in chaos, abuse, alcohol, drug abuse in their homes are drawn, unfortunately, to people who are similar to what they've grown up with. It's almost like chaos becomes normal. So speaking up, telling someone, hey, you know what? You need to go to counseling. Don't get into another relationship, work on yourself, those kinds of things. So speaking up is just a host of things, but continuing to do things like this, speaking out and talking about this.
With our project, we often talk about the 5 Ds of intervention, which is distract, delegate, document, delay, and direct, and as well as how to be an upstander. And when you think about stepping up, how have you done this for our campus, or how have you seen someone do this for our campus?
Yes, I mean, in my case, in a classroom, certainly, I have referred young women multiple times to Haven of Hope. I have referred people, so I step up. I would, and I know you asked about the 5 Ds, and I want to talk about that a little bit too, but I do think there are ways that we should stand up always. And yes, I have done that. Yes, I have seen other people who are defending their friends. I think that is important that we are willing to do that. But how we do that, man, that sometimes can be a challenge. I know that you ask about the 5 Ds, and I do have some information about that I think would be interesting. For me, when I was looking at the 5 Ds, one of them was direct. I would say that's the one I would probably not use as often. You need to really know the person well. And you need to know, when I say the person well, I really mean the person who is the one who you think is being aggressive. Because most of the time when you're very direct, especially, I would say never, probably in alcohol and drug situations, you want to be direct. But if you know someone and you see this happening, saying, hey, hey, this is everything's okay. Can I help? Are you okay? Those kinds of things with direct is truly that interfering. But I always caution people that is dangerous. It can be dangerous to you. And if you don't have knowledge or an understanding of what aggressive behavior looks like, of what someone is capable of, to really usually direct's not going to be the best way. But you do need to know, if you're going to be direct, I would say you need to know the person who's being more aggressive, before you do that. I think distract's a really good one, right? So distracting the person, either one of the people, right? Hey, I tend to distract, I think, probably more than anything, because I can be really loud and funny sometimes, right? So I have a tendency to go, hey, everybody, and just sometimes just make a nut of myself, because distracting works well. So I would say distracting, especially if someone's at a place where it can be easily distracting. So I would say definitely distract. And a lot of times that we can be safe. I would say too, one of the ones I think is delegate. Isn't that right? So you have delegate as well. I would say that's a really good one at a college. If you know something is going on, find someone. If you're at a school, high school, we know that this is prevalent among young girls. I mean, we hear all the time, 13, 14, 15-year-old girls, we know, that it's prevalent. Children, I mean, we know that it's out there. We know the people that we live with are often more dangerous to us than the people we don't. So when we're talking about this, delegating, telling someone in authority, telling someone at a college, telling someone it's on the critical care team, I mean, whatever it might be, you definitely want to take the time to delegate, I would say, and finding someone to help. Sometimes you need to delay. I have found, especially in extremely violent people or people who are very aggressive, that if you approach them, that it's not good for the person. So especially in the circumstance where there's that heightened anger, I would typically say you want to delay. If, the two people we can kind of combine, distract and delay. So if you can distract both of them, delay, walk off to the restroom, talk to the person. Hey, do you need help? Do I need to call the police? Are you okay? Those kinds of things, I would say, that distract and delay, you can use those two things, I think, definitely in common. And sometimes it becomes the idea too that literally you may not be able to intervene, but you can document, right? I would say if you're documenting, if you're looking and you're keeping and filming information, that you definitely need to talk to the person that you are filming. I mean, it's, that's very private information that people are sharing or is happening to them. And so I would say, but, often people need documentation. It's not uncommon to find that people in abusive relationships don't report it, right? And so when they try to say something or do something, there's no documentation that anything has occurred. We already talked about the person is pretty charming. If the police show up, they're charming, right? I think we see that sometimes too. People who are violent and aggressive definitely can gaslight the police, right? I mean, so they can really fool them into thinking, oh, she's just hysterical or she's upset or whatever it might be. So having documentation of where that may have occurred at some point in time, taking pictures, if there's any physical evidence, taking pictures and having that information for later on so that, yes, this is what's happening to me. And again, I go back to, of course, reaching out. I would always say reaching out to get help, us being more informed.
So what is your vision for this project, this grant moving forward on campus? How would you like to see us grow to help our community more?
I think we need more training, right? I said this earlier, and I think we probably hear this one all the time. Well, I wouldn't stay in a relationship like that, right? More training, more information, more intervention. I'm I'm an avid believer in intervening, but even more than that, I'm about prevention. When I talked about the idea, and that's why I'm on the prevention team, when I talked about the idea of prevention, one of the things I think is highly important is the idea that we educate people. Hey, here are the red flags. And when I teach classes, marriage, family, social problems, intro to social, whatever it might be, I will have students and they're marking. My friend has this thing. I have a list of about 15 red flags, right? And so they're marking on here, how many of these? And, so really talking to people about, look, these are the things that you're going to see if the person is jealous, if they're too charming, if they're isolating you from your friends. Prevention is done through knowledge. So sharing with other people, sharing what people can do when they know someone who's involved in a relationship like this, like I talked about earlier, continuing to educate people. I don't think many people realize when they give advice, it could be bad advice, that we need to seek out experts to come to the college, to talk to people, to spread the word, to let others know this. So I would definitely say that I want to see it continue to grow. I'm really interested in the prevention part of this. It is so difficult once you become involved in a relationship like this to get out of it. It is very difficult because often, as I said earlier, people are charming. Your family doesn't even know it, or they like the person or whatever it might be. So I think we need more and more education on prevention, listening to people. I'd like us to continue to grow. How about we teach better and healthy relationships, right? So not only prevention, but, why aren't we having classes on, what's a good relationship like? What does that look like? If I'm involved with someone, what does it look like to have a really good, healthy relationship? That was one of the things that I wrote about when I was writing my dissertation was, what does a healthy relationship look like? How do I know that I'm headed in the right direction? So I think really concentrating on better and healthy relationships, talking about that, telling people to seek counseling, working on yourself first. I mean, just a mental health alliance so people have somewhere to go and can report it. There's just a host of things I still think we can do.
We do offer a lot of workshops with our students focusing on healthy relationships. And so we have a curriculum that we access through One Love. And if anyone would like to go and look at it, it's joinonelove.org or .com, one of those two. They have great videos that relate very well to young adults and teenagers as well. They give you actual real world scenarios that you could see in the hallway or that you could go through, that you could be like, oh, I didn't realize what was going on. Kind of piggybacking off of that, would you like to share any information with us about healthy relationships as you speak about them?
Sure. I mean, to me, a healthy relationship is many things. I would say one of the first things that both of you get to be who you are. Right. I mean, that's so important to a healthy relationship. Ultimately, when I try, and I've been married to be 23 years this year. So when I talk about a healthy relationship, it is the idea that that person inspires me to be the very best that I can be. Right. So healthy relationships is we encourage one another. We make sure that they're accepting us for ourselves. We don't. Some of the best advice my father ever gave me was don't date anybody you have to change. So either you accept them the way that they are and you're okay with who they are, or don't, I don't want to say waste your time, but don't put forth effort into a relationship that's not going to be good or healthy for you. So healthy relationships to me are about the idea of being kind to one another, knowing that someone is going to care for you if you are sick or if you are struggling, that they're going to be there. And so I think that's highly important. Of course, everybody says communication, how well can I communicate with someone? My research ended up when I was really looking at healthy relationships. One of the things that it talked about was understanding when you have a really healthy relationship, what your priorities are. You have two phrases really when I think about relationships, and that comes to the birds of a feather flock together or opposites attract. So, everybody always asks me, hey, which one is it? Because we hear both of those things. And I would say, to me, a healthy relationship is you're going to understand one another's values. You're going to understand, the things that you have in common, the goals that you have in common in life. But ultimately, that the person that you're with makes you or helps you to understand, not makes you definitely, but helps you to understand that you are worthy. And you are. Whoever is out there listening to this now, you are, right? You are. You're valuable. You are worthy. You have a purpose. And being with someone that can understand and appreciate that is essential to a healthy relationship. Being the best version of you can be before you get into a relationship. Work on you. If you've come out of a bad relationship, if you're picking the wrong kind of people, sit down and think about, okay, I got to work on me some. All right. I spent 7 years after I was in the relationship that I talked about. I spent 7 years by myself. I actually thought I was to the point, some of my late 30s, I'm never going to get married again. I went back to college, went into psychology. And I always tell everybody that part of the reason I went back into psychology was, that kind of that teacher, teach thyself, And so it really was for me about the idea of working on me before I worried about being with someone else. So I would say healthy relationships start with you feeling healthy about yourself. If you need to do the counseling, do the work. If you struggled, do the work, right? So I would always say work on yourself, value yourself, right, first. And then when you know your own worth and value, you typically are more likely to pick someone who does too, right? And everybody, to me, deserves to have that, I don't want to say happiness, but peace and contentment that a good and positive relationship can bring into your life. So that's kind of some of my thoughts on relationships.
Well, thank you. I am going to pick your brain a little bit more, though. What kind
Sure.
of advice would you like to leave our listeners with as we close out this session?
I would say that advice as far as, asking about the OVW grant, or are you just asking for it about the grant?
I would say dealer's choice, whatever you feel like to hear.
All right, so I'll do a couple of things. What advice would I give? I'm going to say get an education, right? Actually, I think it is really interesting in marriage and family. One of the things that we talk about, divorce rate is about 25% lower for those who have an education, and people go, well, why is that? And I go, there's really two things to me that occur with that. One is that we have the ability to think outside the box. We learn more critical thinking. We learn the ability to problem solve in a different way. We have to interact in a group often that is different from us, right? Especially if you go to my class. And so what we find, I would say, is getting an education. Tennessee, certainly you can get an associate's for free. We have Tennessee Reconnect. So divorce rates are lower. The other thing is divorce rates are lower among those who have an education because there are differences in finances, right? So that would be my advice as well. I have to throw in here one that I think sometimes, the number one reason that people do not stay in relationships is money. It's, so I would say education helps that too, right? So I would say my final advice on this is a couple of things. Education, I'm going back to that. What was that, right? Education promotes the ability to have some independence too for people. So I do want to advocate for that. But from the other side of this, when I want to wrap up talking about people who have experienced any kind of abuse, I want to encourage them to reach out to someone, find someone to help them. I want to encourage people to talk to others. I also want to say that, I'd like to see the continuation of this program. This is essential. The ability to protect and care for others is essential to our daily life. And I would like to see, of course, this continue in that way because of the positive impact that it can have, that knowing as you and I are talking, and as people watch this and listen to this, they're not going to feel so alone if they've experienced this. And one of the most difficult things to me when I experienced this situation was the sheer weight of isolation, right? So you feel very alone. You feel very sometimes foolish. Wow, I let this happen to me. And that's just not the case. You're not, right? All of us are susceptible to having this happen to us. So what I want to leave with you is this, is that, you know, you can come out on the other side of this, find help. If there's a person out there that is struggling, find help. I want to thank everybody for letting me speak today. I will say that it's not as easy to talk about this, I think, sometimes as people think. Sharing that, you know, in my case, that I have been in this kind of situation, it's not simple, right? But I do it with a purpose, letting people know you're not alone, right? You're not. I just want to say too, I want to say it one last time, you know, you are of value and worth, and your life has meaning, and you can do great things, right? I believe that.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your
Thank
day to talk with us and to give that great message to our listeners. It's been a pleasure to have you on. Where
Thank
can students reach out if they have more questions?
I would say to Dr. Harris, the other Dr. Harris, right, with the OVW grant, and it depends on your area. You can certainly contact Motlow, but Dr. Harris, the OVW grant would be my first recommendation. Depends on your area. I know in my area, I'm at Moore County, Haven of Hope. There are some shelters. There are hotline numbers, but I'm going to go back to the U.S. experts in doing this.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, for sharing your time with us today as well. Here at Motlow, we want to make sure that everyone knows we're all about building a safe community for everyone. If you are someone that you know has been a victim of violence, don't hesitate to reach out to Dr. Harris, Ms. Scales in the compliance office as well, or Haven or Hope. There are resources in our newsletter that are specific to county campuses as well. It only takes one counseling. Yes, exactly.
Yes, right, counseling.
It only takes one person to stand up and make a change. And so maybe you could be that one person. This has been MPower Podcast. Remember to stand up, speak out, and support. Thank you.
Thank you.